Good evening all, and welcome. Tonight, before the video begins, I would like to draw special attention to a video by a friend of mine, The Crime Reel. He's launched a really fascinating video on the Amityville horror, and I think the majority of you would really like it. I've left a link in the description, and at the end of the video, there is a link on screen. So, if you want to have a good listen about the Amityville horror, I strongly suggest you do. But for now, it's time to get comfortable. Strap your seatbelts and let the darkness take control. I was walking my dog and crossing the street with a green light when a guy blows through the red light and almost hits me and my dog. I yell out, "Arse!" and he slams on his brakes and turns around and pulls into the parking lot ahead of me. I get closer and see the car has Illinois plates, while I live in Pennsylvania. He says, "Careful who you call names. I've killed people." I just keep walking and he drives away. The next day I hear spree killer Andrew Canaan used stolen credit cards at a gas station in my town. It was 100% him. The other night, I was driving into the center lane of a 3-lane city street when all of a sudden a car comes into my right blind spot and almost slams into me. I look over and see it swerving in and out of the lane, braking abruptly. I honk and I look over to see if the driver is possibly distracted, and I see that the man driving is drinking something out of his brown bottle. The man then comes up to my side and is screaming at the top of his lungs. Not wanting to get involved, I then make a lane change to the leftmost lane to get away from the man. I can still hear him screaming, so I turn on my rearview camera and see the man swerving across 2 lanes from the rightmost lane to get behind me. He then starts speeding up as if he's trying to ram into me from behind. Once I see him inches away from my bumper, I decide to run the red light I am stopped at and make a right turn in front of the 2 lanes of traffic beside me, in the hopes that at this point he'll just leave me alone. I look in my rear view camera and once again I see the man is following me, trying to hit me from behind yet again. I panic and speed off on a side street, but I look back and he won't let up. He's swerving in the lanes behind me and is trying to keep up. In the distance, I see a freeway on-ramp, so I speed over in the hopes of losing him on the freeway. The on-ramp has 2 lanes that merge into one. I pass up a car prior to the merge, thinking that the car will create a buffer between me and the man chasing me. When I look back into my camera, I see that the man is driving in the shoulder, on the brush, to the side of the on-ramp in order to pass the other car and catch me up. At this point I'm driving close to 100 miles an hour and scared for my life. So I slow down and dial 911. I explain the situation to dispatch and she recommends I try to get away to safety. The man then catches me up and begins coming up to my side of the freeway, and he repeatedly tries to swerve into me as if to ram me or run me off the road. I slow down in the hopes that he will pass me up, but he too slows down and his wife in the passenger seat throws a bottle at my car. For a second I lose visibility, as the car is covered in a brown foamy liquid. I think to myself, surely this is the extent of his road rage, and I look over and it seems as if he's continuing on the freeway, ready to get away. I then pull off the next freeway exit, thinking I can just leave the situation, and as I do, the man sees me and makes a 4-lane change onto the exit ramp and tries to ram me once again at the freeway exit. I am then forced to speed through the city streets, and I finally end up at a red light, trapped next to the man. I look over at the man and roll down my window, and he's screaming at me, "Why did you honk at me? You're trying to make me look like a bad father in front of my kids? You want to go?" His wife is also yelling at me, asking why would I honk at him in front of his kids. I look into the back seat and see 2 children in car seats. Since I'm on speaker with the dispatcher, she hears all of this and tells me I should just try and get away. At this point I'm done. I just want to get away from him, so I make a U-turn to head back onto the freeway. He follows me and almost hits me in a plastic construction lane barrier to do so. He then follows me again and is trying to hit me from behind once I get onto the overpass to get on the freeway. I glance at him to the side of me and see that he's holding something up in my direction. Suddenly, I hear a very loud bang, and the dispatcher on the phone screams, "Did he shoot you? Are you okay?" Thinking I've been shot, I start screaming. He's shooting at me. He's shooting at me. He's gonna kill me. Realizing that running away isn't working, I stop at the man's speed off. Luckily, there's no broken glass and I'm not injured in any way. The dispatcher tells me to pull off to a nearby safe location, so I go to the parking lot of a nearby mall, and I tell the dispatcher the make, color, and model of the car as well as the partial license plate. The whole time I drive there, I'm very concerned the man could be following me again, but they send an officer immediately over to file a police report. In waiting for the officer, I realize that my car's cameras are always recording, so I hit the save button and the officer comes over and I tell him the story describing everything in detail. I also tell him that I may have some footage of the whole thing. We take a walk around my car and for the most part there's no damage. The officer then informs me that because I'm not injured and because there is no damage to the car, there really isn't anything that can be done. I ask him if it wasn't an assault, and he says because the bottle hit my car and not me, it's not assault. I ask him if it's reckless driving, and he says here in California that's a misdemeanor, and that requires the presence of a CHP officer to convict. I then ask him if it could be considered an attempt at murder because he was trying to ram into me, but he says that this is just plain old road rage and there's not much that can be done. At most, the officer says that once he has the complete license plate, an officer can go out and talk to him. I ask him if the potential footage could help in getting this man reprimanded in some way, and he tells me to only send me the highlights and necessary screenshots, though he doesn't think anything at all can be done. At the end of all of this, I'm extremely shaken up. I eventually go home and review the footage captured by my car. Luckily, I have the entire thing recorded. The moment he almost hit me, his wife throwing a bottle at me, and his face as he's yelling at me, his license plate, and even him trying to ram me, it's all recorded. A few days later, the officer calls me and confirms the license plate I have in the video with a recording he has from the freeway / on and off ramps. A week and a half have passed and there have been no updates. While I understand the law is the law, it is unacceptable to me that this man could be so overtly aggressive on the road, threatening my life and the lives of his children, and the lives of everyone else on the road, with no punishment. I was genuinely scared for my life, and in the process, both he and I endangered others on the road. Ultimately, this has left me feeling very disappointed with the system. An act of violence was committed, and due to technicalities, the driver gets off? I'm trying to keep my retelling as factual as possible, but this was a really terrifying experience. Even in the past few days, I still feel a bit hesitant to be an aggressive driver, like overtaking people or just changing lanes, and have lost my comfort in honking. I really wish I could say this didn't get to me, but it has. One odd detail is that the man was taking pictures of my car before the bang happened. What could he possibly want that for? Has anyone been in a situation like this? Is there truly nothing that can be done? Any recommendations how I can at least have someone check on those kids? Like I said, I have footage and everything. This happened last year. My friend and I were coming back to my town after hanging out across the state line, when this lady started flashing her brights to my friend to go faster. We were going the speed limit and it was dark and hard to see. After a while, she pulls to the side of us, which she could have done the whole time, and we can hear her yelling at us like a banshee through our rolled up windows. In our state, several people have been shot over road rage, so my friend grabs for her phone in case something starts going down. As she's reaching, the car swerves slightly towards the lady and she recovers. The lady screams even louder and gets behind us again, riding our bumper. We come to the first exit for the town I live in, and I told my friend to take it so we could not have this crazy lady next to us. She follows us to the exit, so I have my friend turn into a parking lot. The lady followed us but got caught by a red light, so we leave the parking lot back to the highway, and she comes right back at us again. Luckily, a truck pulled out and blocked her vision of us, and we made a right turn when the traffic allowed on a red light and swerved between cars to put as much distance between us as possible. We finally lost her after she had been following us for 11 miles. Let me preface this by saying that while I was pregnant, a colleague of mine with whom I was close had started coming with me anytime I left the office to do anything. Pick up records, shop during lunch, grab something to eat, because she was adamant that a young, heavily pregnant girl shouldn't be out by herself. Too many horror stories about pregnant women being taken or cut open for their babies and stuff. She would say that, and no matter where we went, she would always have an absolutely true story about someone she knew personally who had been stalked or threatened or nearly abducted while pregnant. At the time, I brushed off her warnings as utter nonsense. Skip forward a few months. I was 23 and a new mother confined at home on maternity leave, and very excited for my first daytime excursion out the house with my infant son, who was 2 to 3 months old at the time. My husband wasn't too thrilled at the prospect of me going out alone with our son while he was at work, especially in my pre-mum car, a white Mustang GT convertible, but he begrudgingly accepted on the condition that I swap cars with him for the day, since he drove the Ford Explorer we had purchased in anticipation of the baby's arrival. I'd only driven the truck once since we bought it, so I wasn't that familiar with it. Nonetheless, I loaded it up with the stroller, the car seat, a diaper bag overflowing with nearly all of our baby gear, and a 6-month emergency supply of formula. You know, just in case. I was only running out to do errands and planned to stop at Target, the grocery store, and pick up a few things for lunch on the way home. My first stop was Target, where I relished my newfound freedom, not paying nearly as much attention to my surroundings as I should have been. But on my way out, one thing did catch my eye. An average-looking white guy in his late 20s to early 30s, average height, with dark blonde hair, wearing a tight, light grey t-shirt and nerdy glasses, leaning against the wall leading to the store exit. I immediately felt a wave of terror wash over me, but I convinced myself there was absolutely nothing abnormal about him to warrant my worry, and I brushed it off as new mum paranoia. Next, I made my way to the grocery store, where I parked towards the back of the parking lot to avoid smashing into any other cars, since I had no practice parking such a big truck. As I hopped out the driver's seat, another completely normal thing grabbed my attention. A compact red Chevy parked 2 lanes over from me, with a good 12 to 15 spaces between it and the car parked next to it. I had parked far back for a reason. I remember thinking the Chevy had no similar discernible reason, but again, I'm a paranoid mum with an already paranoid nature, so I ignored it. I did make note, however, that I thought the Chevy had parked there before me. I would later realize it had followed me there, but the driver still hadn't gotten out, even though I had pulled in after it and spent a good 10 minutes getting the baby into the stroller before going in. You would think the driver would have gone into the store by now. Over an hour later, I returned to the truck and scanned the parking lot. There was the red Chevy still parked in the same spot, driver still in his seat. Again, I rationalized that he must have gone in after me and somehow had people finishing just before me. Otherwise, he'd had to have been watching me, and rational people don't think other people are watching them, right? I packed everything up and headed across the street to the McDonald's drive-thru to pick up something to eat on my way home. The Chevy was following me, I noted, but while I pulled up to the speaker, he pulled into the back of the parking lot of an adjacent bar and parked facing me. Logic would normally overcome at this point, but I was determined not to be crazy, so I collected my food and decided to prove once and for all that the Chevy wasn't following me. I left the drive-thru and headed back to the grocery store, where I had first noticed the Chevy since he was still there. I thought he would have no reason to go back unless he was stalking me, and sure enough he followed. Now hell-bent on proving myself wrong, I looped around the parking lot, crossed into the neighboring street, and back through the parking lot again. Something no one would have any reason to do unless you're trying to prove that you're being followed. Of course, to see if he followed. I had to repeat the loop 3 times before I was thoroughly convinced that I was being stalked. I finally allowed the fight or flight feeling I had been fending off all morning to take over. I suddenly thought of my colleague who had repeatedly told me to never drive straight home if I ever thought I was being followed. Knowing that I lived in a very remote area with no neighbors, I started to head for the police station. The only problem was, I hadn't thought to check the gas gauge, and since my idiot husband never stops for gas, the low gas warning chose to go off at that very moment. I knew I didn't have enough gas to make it to the police station, let alone home, and the Chevy had to know I was onto him by now, so I wasn't about to risk stopping to fill up. I started coming up with alternatives. I could call 911 from my cell phone, explain the situation, and have a police officer meet me in the middle before I ran out of gas. Brilliant, I thought to myself, and as I reached across the passenger seat to grab my cell phone. Unfortunately, as I was unfamiliar with the truck, I didn't know that you weren't supposed to lay anything on the passenger seat. One sharp turn, and whatever was on it would slip across the seat and down into the space between the side of the seat and the door. I frantically patted down the entire seat before I realized my phone must have slipped, and there was no way I could reach it without pulling over and getting out. By now I was going 80 miles an hour down the highway, and the Chevy was right behind me. I peeked out the rearview mirror, and he was close enough for me to make out what he was wearing, a light grey t-shirt, and I recognized the nerdy glasses covering his determined eyes. I realized it was the totally normal guy I had seen standing at the exit of Target. He'd been following me for almost 3 hours by now. I suddenly understood the gravity of the situation. I wasn't crazy, I was being hunted. The last idea I could conjure up was to make a break for my husband's uncle and aunt's house. They lived in the neighborhood just next to the grocery store, and his uncle worked the swing shift, which meant he would be home right now. If I stayed in the truck and honked the horn, I could get him to come out and see what was going on. He's a badass kind of guy, definitely the kind you wouldn't want to annoy, and I knew he'd protect me and the baby. The only problem was, I was going in the wrong direction down the highway, and I'd have to take a jug handle and wait at the light to turn myself around. And by now I was sure that even a red light would be more than enough for this guy to bust open my window and end my life and steal my son. Then I recalled another bit of advice from my colleague. If you ever need help but you can't call for it, break the law and you'll get the police's attention. I decided my best course of action was to make an illegal U-turn at the next possible traffic light, and if the Chevy followed me, book it to my uncle's house. If my blatant traffic violation caused the attention of a nearby police officer, I could appeal for them for help, and his mere presence would likely scare the Chevy away. I passed 3 lights waiting to find a patrol car until I saw an opportunity. A very short gap in a barrage of lunch traffic spanning 4 lanes. Maybe, just maybe, I could pull off this U-turn and the Chevy would get stuck waiting for the traffic to pass before he could follow. I stayed in the left lane, and I approached the light praying it would stay green long enough for me to make it, and tanked every pound of what little weight I had on the gas pedal. Right before I approached the light, it turned yellow, so I quickly turned the truck left and rammed it, crossing my fingers I didn't cause an accident. The tires squealed so loud I was sure I was going to flip the truck, but I kept going, ignoring the noxious smell of burning rubber, frantically checking behind me to see if it had made it. He was stuck at the red light, blocked by traffic, still facing in the opposite direction, pounding into his steering wheel. I drove around back roads near the highway for what seemed like an eternity, until the gas ran to E before I finally had the courage to stop. At the gas station, I got out to get my cell phone while the attendant pumped my gas, trying to conceal my violent trembling. I was too afraid to sit for long, so I waited until I was back on the road to call the police. By now I knew the Chevy had gone, but the dispatcher still sent an officer to meet me on the highway and lead me back to the station, just in case he was still looking for me. I was too consumed with escaping to catch its license plate, and I didn't know the color, make, nor model of the car, and I had gotten a pretty good look at the driver and target. The police were able to get a photo of the driver and the car from the surveillance videos at Target and McDonald's, and I was pretty confident they'd find him. Unfortunately, by the time we had moved out of state, a year later, they still had no clear idea who the guy even was. The fact that he was unsuccessful in his pursuit probably bumped the priority of my case to the bottom of the pile. Although the police department did spend quite some time investigating, fearing that he had succeeded before, or worse, that he might strike again. I'll probably never know what the guy's intentions truly were. The police, family, and friends have theorized everything from a stupid prank spawned from road rage to an easy rape to kidnapping my son. But I still shudder to think what would have happened had he caught me. And even now, 4 years and 5,000 miles away from the town where it happened, I still check the parking lot of every establishment I visit, just in case he found me and has come to finish what he started. If anything good did come from this though, is that I learnt my lesson. No matter how crazy and paranoid my husband thinks I may be, I will always trust my gut when I feel like something's wrong. Oh, and now I always make sure to fill up the gas tank whenever it drops to half a tank, so I never have to worry about stopping for gas if I'm ever in a sticky situation again. My name is Gary, and this happened to me in my senior year of high school. I live in West Tennessee and we usually get 2 or 3 snow days a year. The area isn't used to much snow, so normally a small amount could get us out for the day. This particular day should have been a snow day, but for whatever reason the school decides the roads were safe enough to drive on, even though some patches of the road had ice on them. We were all annoyed but went to school anyway. And after school got out, I went to my friend John's house and we hung out and played video games till it got dark and I decided to drive home. Mind you, the roads had gotten a little better but some ice was still there. It's about a 15-minute drive from John's house to mine, but I was trying to be extra careful not to hit any ice, so it was going to take a little longer than usual. Pulling out of John's neighborhood, there's a blind hill behind you that always stresses me out, because if someone came through there fast, they could rear-end me. The road isn't very busy, so it's never been a big deal, but this time a car comes over the hill right as I pull out, and they had to slam on the brakes because I pulled out in front of them. In my defense, they were going way too fast, but I still felt bad about it. They laid on the horn and were clearly angry at me, and I gave a small apology wave and went on my way with them still behind me. 10 minutes later, they're still behind me and tailgating me with their brights on, making it harder for me to see. I was getting nervous because they were clearly very angry, and I realized by this point that they were following me. I didn't know what to do, and definitely didn't want to lead them to my house, so I started taking random turns trying to lose them, but they were right on me the whole time. Eventually I started driving faster, so that maybe I could get enough distance between us so that I could make a turn they wouldn't see. But that was a big mistake. In hindsight, I should have driven to the police station, but for whatever reason, I thought this was the best idea. Going a good deal over the speed limit, I find a turn and begin to slightly brake so I wouldn't turn full speed. But as I was beginning to turn, I hit a patch of black ice and my car slid off the road and into a small ditch. Crap. I didn't want to floor it because I was afraid my car would tip over on its side, so I just sat there in disbelief until I look in my rearview mirror and see the car is now parked on the side of the road with the driver and passenger doors open. Before I knew it, my car door swings open, a man unbuckles my seatbelt and pulls me out the car. I really regret not locking my door because the man and his friends proceed to kick the crap out of me while I'm curled up in a ball and screaming for them to stop. They just keep cussing at me and kicking until they were safely satisfied and get in the car and drive off. At this point I was completely shaken and got back in my car and called for my mum. She told me to call the police and that she was on her way to collect me. The police arrived, but I didn't have much to tell them other than 2 guys in a sedan followed me from that neighborhood and beat me up. It was dark, so I didn't know what kind of car it was or what they looked like, so the cops never found out who did it. If I had just driven to the police station instead of trying to lose them myself, I could have saved myself a lot of pain. This happened about 3 months ago, and it still comes up in conversation because we just genuinely don't know what happened or what was about to happen to us. It was around 7 p.m. in November, and it was dark in Metro Detroit. I was driving and my fiancée was riding shotgun. We were exiting a pretty populated highway when we turned onto a mile road near the city's shopping mall and outlet centers. Being in close proximity to the mall, it was strange the boulevard was that empty at this time of night. So we're driving on the deserted westbound side of the boulevard when we noticed there was a stopped and running vehicle in the middle lane. Again, it was dark aside from the streetlights that lined the road every 80 yards or so, but their brake lights were obviously lit, and we were approaching quick. My fiancé and I were talking in the car at the time when we both kind of stopped to verbally question what we were both seeing. It was strange behavior, especially since the speed limit was 45 to 50 on this mile road, so you don't want to be stopped, especially this close to people exiting the highway. So we slowed down since we're cautious drivers. We approached and passed the vehicle on the far left lane as it was in the middle, and when we were about a car length away from it, the driver gunned it and started speeding to catch us up. We never left our left-hand lane, but at this point I was braking again because the behavior was off and we noticed their driving was so sporadic. Braking was almost instinctual, as much as it probably wasn't safe to do so. Continuing to drive down this mile road with still no traffic we can see in either direction, we noticed the driver was swerving their car between the middle lane and the left lane, as if trying to intentionally sideswipe us. Instant red flag. It wasn't like the driver was intoxicated or texting and just doing a poor job at staying in their lane. This was a driver in control of their swerving and coming dangerously close to hitting the side of my Jeep, going 45 miles an hour. Bad vibes. Before we knew it, we were blinded by a spotlight coming from the driver's window into my car via the passenger window. I have 20 tints on my Jeep windows, which usually help control the brightness of the sun most mornings and evenings, and even when the tints, this spotlight stunned us and we couldn't see anything but white. I didn't have time to check my mirrors before slamming on my brakes. Not sure I would have been able to see in my mirrors after being blinded. I remember my fiancé screaming, "What the hell?" and we opened our eyes and the driver was yards ahead of us speeding to get away. My fiancé dialed 911 immediately. I don't take crap, so I started racing down the road to catch him up for a license plate number. In Michigan, we have Michigan left turn lanes, and I could see the vehicle up ahead turning into one to enter the mall parking lot, which is a huge roundabout. The roundabout speed limit is about 25 miles an hour, with frequent stop signs and intersections. My fiancé connected with dispatch on the phone as I was trying desperately to catch up to this vehicle. They were blowing red lights and stop signs in sight. Dispatch recommended we don't follow, but I kind of did anyway because I was really upset and committed to grabbing their plate number, but from a safe distance and at a safe speed. No way was I going to tail this person when I didn't know if they had a weapon or something. Long story short, this driver knew we were following them and they were speeding through the roundabout, cutting drivers off and blowing intersections when we lost sight of them. At this point, the police said there were cops in the area that were already on their way looking for the vehicle we described and that we should leave it to them. We weren't going to jeopardize our safety and the safety of other drivers just because I was angry. So we stopped our chase but still crossed an intersection into another shopping center across the street when we saw the driver enter. We figured we could prowl instead of chase in case we saw them again. But we never found the car, never found out who the driver was, what his motives were, or if the cops found him. We knew he was a male because we saw him through the driver's side window before he blinded us. White, male, dark ball cap. He drove a dark sedan. Looked like a newer Ford Fusion. It was a close run-in and I'm not sure what would have happened if he'd have successfully crashed into us on that deserted mile road, or if his spotlight had successfully veered my car off the road. To the dude who scared the crap out of us, and took away our eyesight while driving a moving vehicle, let's not meet again. Every weekday, I would wake up early at around 5 a.m. for a morning workout, then head to my job. Generally, I would leave my house around 5:30 because my morning drive took about 25 to 30 minutes, giving me enough time for 2 hours before I needed to leave before my shift started. Most of my drive was just me putting loud music on, trying not to fall asleep, and it being a freeway before 6, almost everyone was going at least 10 miles an hour over the speed limit. I'll drive most of the time on a main interstate before turning off onto a smaller highway, which I would only use for a mile or so. This highway was 3 lanes on each side. People also drive fast on here, but usually not more than 75 miles an hour or so, and while you get some unsafe drivers in the morning, most people aren't swerving erratically. The highway runs north to south. An on-ramp from a main street becomes a lane. Then there are 2 entrances from the freeway. I would take that every day. One from the eastbound side and one from the westbound side. I hope that makes sense, but basically, I got on from the eastbound side, right as 3 cars from the westbound side are entering. One was sort of a orangey sports car, and the other 2 were identical grey sedans. I don't remember exactly what make or model they were, but I remember them being fairly uncommon, not a sedan you see plenty of times a day. The orange car was sandwiched in between the 2. These guys were going at least 80. The orange car would change lanes, and the car in front would cut him off, while the other behind would change lanes to remain behind. They kept this up the entire time I was on the highway near them, weaving in and out of cars, not slowing down before I pulled off at my exit. This could be a complete coincidence and some horrible drivers, but I definitely got the vibe that the driver of the orange car was trying to get away from the grey ones. Maybe it was extreme road rage, or maybe something more sinister. Regardless, grey car drivers, let's not meet. Being from a third world country, you see a lot of stuff happening all over. You never think it's going to happen to you. After all, you're careful and you know better. You mind your own business, and everything's gonna go 5 by 5. My mom is one of the strongest women I know. She's one of 15 siblings, which I think toughened her up and made her a woman of strong morals and no nonsense. She's one of the eldest of her siblings, so she has that nurturing mama bear thing down. She'll take crap from no one, and when confronted with fight or flight, she'll fight every single time. Like the one time my mum was picking up my sister from kindergarten, and some guy tried to snatch her purse. She took notice of him walking towards her with no good intentions, and she told my sister to hold onto her skirt. And when the man made his move, she just pressed her thumbs into the man's eyes and scratched him wherever she could reach. She's gotten mellow later in life, but for me, she's still the epitome of love and strength. This is the story of how I almost lost my mum to road rage. I was 10, it was a Sunday, and I had gone to the swimming pool with my friends. My dad was supposed to pick me up at 5, but by 7 I was fuming, angry, and decided to walk home, as it was probably a 20-minute walk. I got home and was mad, and my sisters were scolding me because it was dark and dangerous for a 10-year-old to be walking home on his own, and my dad had gone to pick me up 5 minutes ago. But I didn't care. I was pissed, and just walked into my parents' room to give my mum a piece of my mind. When I found her sobbing and in distress, I asked her what was going on, and she was angry at my dad and didn't want to talk to him again. My anger faded and curiosity striked instead. So I asked her. Turns out around 4:30 when my dad was going to pick me up, he was coming back from his farm and subdued cut off my dad, who unfortunately has some road rage, honked his horn, pulled down the window in my mum's side, and yelled a branch of obscenities. The dude in the other car lowered his window, pulled out a gun, and began shooting at my dad's car. Dad hit the brakes and let the other car pull further away. They stopped and got out the car to catch their breath, and that's when my mum saw a hole in the space between the passenger's front door and the passenger's back door. A bullet nearly missed my mum's head, and she was hysterical. They got home and mum broke down and cried. Dad had to calm her down. That's why they were late to collect me. It's probably not as scary as other stories, but it's been 20 years since that day, and every once in a while I'll think to myself, if there had been a few centimeters in difference, my mum could be dead. And the what if is what scares me every time. My mum was dating my dad at the time. I was around 10. He lived with his parents since his dad was sick, and since it wasn't really that far from our house, we thought we'd go visit him there. We had dinner and stayed for a while. He gave us gifts, he gave me a cow plushie which I still have to this day, and everything goes well. Then it gets late, around 11 PM, and we decide to leave. It's literally pitch black. Also, I may remind you that it's probably mid-December. There's no snow falling at the moment, so it's icy and you couldn't see your hands in front of your face. So like any normal human beings would, my mum puts her high beams on. Something I forgot to add to this is that she would usually shut them off when she got close to the other cars, and it's not like she was blinding them. She only had them on when she was very far away. You'll understand why I said this in a minute. We get behind this black car in which the driver is acting like a jerk and won't drive normally. They're speeding up to almost 70 and then slowing down to an almost stop. And my mum can't turn because the road we're on is rural and there's nothing but cow fields on either side. There was nowhere to go, so we ended up behind him with an extremely aggravated driver behind us. It's a bit harder to see again, so my mum puts on her high beams a fair distance away from the car in front, because you wouldn't do that if you weren't far away. But of course the driver in front of us stops, completely, and then this huge burly, bigger built man starts sprinting over to our car at top speed. I start screaming and crying and can see that he's holding a blunt object in his hand. My mum recoils as she fears the worst as she looks around, trying to figure out how she could escape. There's a car coming from the other way, so she can't turn around. His car is in front of us, so she can't hit the gas. There's only fenced off fields around us, and he pounds on the window like the FBI and starts screaming and swearing. He starts threatening us, saying that he'd kill my mum if he ever caught her with our high beams on again. Of course I'm screaming and crying, and being a small, skinny 10-year-old girl not knowing if me and my mum were about to get killed, and also knowing full well if she did, I wouldn't know what to do or how to get home, and I didn't have my dad's phone number memorized at the time, and I didn't exactly remember how to work my mum's phone, so I didn't even know how to call my dad to begin with. The man's body language was just off. I'm not sure if he was drunk or high, but it seemed that way, and he looked at me for a second, which scared me and my mum rightfully. My mum is also a very small lady, and our car wasn't very fast, so she wasn't sure what to do because neither fight or flight would work at this point. The blunt object in his hand turned out to be a huge flashlight, which he began to repeatedly hit the window with. He also started flashing the light in my mum's face to blind her. Ironic. My mum yelled at him to get lost as he hit the window harder, about to break it. Thankfully, the car behind us started to lay on the horn, and he got back into his car out of fear and sped off. My mum called out to my dad, who drove around almost all night to look for the guy but didn't find anything. I can't remember if we called the cops or not. I just remember crying into my pillow all night long. I'm a 20-year-old female, and I was on my way home from work 9 months ago, just cruising by, passing in the left lane like you're supposed to. There was this white Buick just chilling in the left lane, and I get a little close to his butt, cause he's going slow in the fast lane. And then this man starts brake checking me multiple times, then a red light comes up, and he gets over to the right lane and rolls his window down. It was a nice day and I had mine down too. He's glaring at me and I'm like, "What? You ride in the right and pass in the left?" And he goes, "I was in the right, you stupid idiot." Apparently this middle-aged man didn't know his left from right, and after a second of arguing, the man pulls out into the middle of the intersection and makes a U-turn and is facing the grassy median and facing me with his camera pointed at me, still hollering. The lights turn green and I take off to get away from him. He turns around and follows. I go and get onto 2 different highways going about 90, safely avoiding people, and then I go back to the suburb, because now that he's following me I'm about to start leading him back to work because I wasn't going to lead him to my house, and my boyfriend was at work, so I knew I had people there to protect me. The light I wanted to turn right at was busy, so I cut through a gas station and turned right, barely stopping, still being cautious of the others around me, and this man still follows and my attempts to get away from him. At this point I'm fed up with him and want him to follow me back to work so I can kick his ass. I get back to the road we were on and got into the left lane, and the light was red. Instead of following me, he stays in the straight lane with his phone out at the window pointing at my car. At that point he stopped following me. Must have been too far out his way. But the two highways and turnarounds weren't. I hope he calls the cops, as my car is registered to a retired cop. And then on top of it, I know for a fact that the red light he ran at the beginning has light cameras. So I hope he got popped for that and has to pay the fine. I believe he did all of this because I drove a 2012 Ford Mustang, and people around here just don't like muscle car owners for some reason. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening and for following me on Twitter, which if you haven't done yet, you should probably certainly do. A lot of you have been talking to me about merch, and I am working on it. I really am. What am I working on right now? Right now I think I've got the merch, the secret project, the other secret project, and daily videos nearly. So yeah, I'm pretty busy. Sorry for no upload yesterday. Here is my explanation. So, January 12th is my grandma's, what is it? It's like her official birthday, but she celebrates it on the 16th. So the 12th, one birthday. The 13th, well, like a half birthday. 13th, Pandora's birthday. 14th, Valentine's Day. 15th, Recovery Day. 16th, my grandma's real birthday. And the 17th, my cousin, who lives with us, is her birthday too. So it's like 3.5 birthdays and Valentine's Day in the space of about 5-6 days. So it's been crazy. It's been non-stop. And yesterday, I was just exhausted. And I really couldn't publish. I am very sorry to everyone who wanted to listen but couldn't because I didn't publish. Hope you understand. February is the only one that has, like a string of birthdays. And then on the 26th, it is History Profile's birthday, but at least there's a break until then. I'm sure in a few days I'll be asking you to go comment on this channel and stuff to wish him a happy birthday. In any case, this video outro has gone on for way too long. Thank you for your understanding. Now, I would really appreciate it if you click the link on screen and check out that video by my friend The Crime Reel on the Amityville Horror. It's really, really good. You guys will really like it. Please tell him you sent. Tell him I sent you. There it is, right? Click it now. Please. Thanks guys, stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.